Here. My name is Jonna Quinn, and I wanted to welcome everyone to today's Griffin at Home with Tim Smyth. Tim is a 2008 graduate and went through our School of Graduate and Professional Studies. He has much experience and has kind of created this wonderful way of teaching using comics to teach high school history, and has been interviewed by PBS and has spoken and has sessions at Comic-Cons around the country. And so I'd just like to welcome Tim and thank him for being here today, and welcome all of you. And let's get started. So Tim, thanks so much.
Right. So good morning, good afternoon. So I set up a PowerPoint. Feel free to interrupt me at any point. I wasn't really sure what everybody would want to about. So I kind of put my website up here because if you do want to know more, I put a lot of my lesson plans and resources. Anytime I find free online comic books that are great for the classroom, I put them on my website. There's my email address and my social media tag. So anytime you want to reach out to me, I'm always happy to talk. You know, in a half hour, I just kind of want to give everybody a little bit of a taste for it. I do teach at Wissahickon High School, which is right down the road from Gwynedd Mercy. And I've been teaching for about 20 years. And I do a lot of work with all grade levels. I actually am becoming a faculty member at University of Penn as a reading teacher and writing teacher. And so it's been quite the journey, but I started everything at Gwynedd Mercy. So we made the cover of the Today magazine, and there's my kids, and Gwynedd's been really kind to me, and you know, I'm happy to kind of give back any way that I can. And it's always my favorite when I'm invited to come out to Gwynedd to talk to the education students, to kind of talk about how education is so much more than just standardized testing and things. So this was part of my Gwynedd presentation. I went back to school for my master's degree as a reading specialist, and I was the only male, and I was the only non-elementary school teacher. And I think a lot of people forget that you have to teach reading on all levels. And so we were talking a lot about how boys didn't like to read, and we were taking a look at the data, and all true. And I started asking questions about, what do you have in your students read? And I said, well, I don't like to read that either. Anna Karenina, I talk about, almost killed me in high school. And I love to read, don't get me wrong. I was like the weird kid reading Stephen King in like 6th grade. And my Gwynedd Mercy professors were very much about reading is reading, whether it's the back of a cereal box, a manual for a sports page, anything. And so they helped me to overcome that hump. And we started talking about comic books, and my professors were like, yeah, sure, go for it. So somewhere I was promised, covered in dust somewhere in the Gwynedd Library, is my research paper that I wrote on using comic books and pop culture in the classroom. And now I get to travel around the country. I work for the federal government. I work with the Pennsylvania Department of Education, and I do in-services and all kinds of really neat things in addition to teaching. So this was part of my presentation that I gave at Gwynedd Mercy. This was a picture from our textbook about teaching about the Battle of Thermopylae. Nothing wrong, but then kind of, well, can we do this? And we talked about just simple engagement. We talked about how comic books give us the scaffolding. They allow our students to have these built-in techniques to read and to feel comfortable. So whenever I give presentations, this is when I know who the administrators are, because when I start talking about Common Core, they'll start writing things down and taking pictures. When I write curriculum materials for Macmillan and for a lot of different comic book companies, and everything is always tied to Common Core. And literally, on the next slide, if you look here down towards the bottom, it literally says graphic novel in the Common Core standards. So I always say that if you're not using graphic novels in education, you're actually not following Common Core. And we kind of use those terms interchangeably, graphic novel and comic book. A graphic novel is just a longer comic book. It just sounds, more literacy type, more literature. It's the same thing. It's just a longer version. Lots of studies that we can point to that we know, and I can tell you this from my own students and my own children, that students will be exposed to higher level vocabulary in a comic book than they will in a prose book. And a lot of times it's the images that help them to understand these words. And we know that. This is my favorite slide of my presentation. This idea that comics are not dumbed down, never have been. And part of the reason is you only have so many words. And so you can't go and explain the things that are going on. Um, I was lucky enough, a few years ago, I had a staff developer told me that I had to put myself out on social media, and I had a blog, and I had to share what I was doing. And I always said, you know, well, that's what like millennials do. That's what the kids do. Like, I don't want to brag. And turns out that people care about what educators are doing in the classroom, particularly authors. And so I had a PBS reached out to me and asked me to start writing articles for them. And about 5-6 years ago, I was on my way out the door of teaching. I really was. I won't get into why. I resigned as department chair. It was that year. And here I was, published by PBS. And because of my degree from Good and Mercy, I became passionate about what I was doing again in the classroom. And so I always try to encourage teachers to do that, whatever it is. For me, it's hip hop and comic books. If you can be your authentic self in the classroom, it's so much more powerful. And whenever I work with administrators and school boards and Department of Education, I mean, that is our #1 mission. We are losing teachers in the first 3 to 5 years. They're just not coming back. And we need to talk about these things. So these are some pictures of my classroom. And it's funny because when I share them on Facebook, sometimes I have friends who say, wait a minute, I thought you taught high school. When did you go down to elementary school? I think all classrooms need to look something like this. It doesn't have to be comic books, but math classrooms, health and phys ed classrooms, we should all have books and make them available. And we need to make sure that the books we choose are books that our students can see themselves in. And even though as a reading specialist, I know how to get the reading level for any book, and it's just not how I sort my books. If one of my high school kids wants to read a book that's on a first grade reading level, go for it. Because one of my favorite 2 books here, When the Beat Was Born and The Roots of Rap, they're kind of picture books. And it excites students to then go and they write a research paper and they do more reading and more understanding. And it's these types of highly engaging books that make them want to learn more. And I'm looking at these pictures, and man, I miss my classroom so much. I haven't seen it since March, but you know, here's some of my Black History Month displays. And so what I try to do is put out prose books with comic books and the mixture of the two. And again, just to get students to start saying, oh, I didn't know about this, and I didn't know about that, and can I learn more about this? And then I also have students create their own comic books. About world events, about modern civil rights, about modern fairy tales, all different kinds of things that we can do. So this is my son. We were going to San Diego Comic-Con, and there's like 1,000 pictures of him going across the screen. My son has Mulleray's meningitis. He gets hospitalized quite often. He's in a lot of aches and pains, migraines, and it's been heartbreaking to see him go through this. And what made it worse was in kindergarten, his teacher pigeonholed him as a reluctant reader. He really had a lot of struggles early on. And we took away all of his superhero stuff. We took away his Spider-Man backpack, and he had to take my boring lunchbox to school because we thought we were being good parents. And then because of Gwen and Mercy, the light bulb goes off. Wait a minute, like this dude wants to read comic books. This is what he's interested in. And that's how we learned how to read. So I get chills every time I talk about my son. My son is my favorite hero. He's never given up. He has an IEP where he doesn't have to do any homework. He's never missed it. He just keeps going. And now he reads everything. And for him, it was comics that was that gateway for him, like it is for a lot of students. And so now publishers send him books in the mail for free. They don't send them to me. They send them to my son. And he has his own hashtag. And he writes reviews. He has authors come and talk to his classrooms because it's him, it's Liam. And my daughters do the same. This new kid is the first graphic novel to win the Newbery Award, also won the Coretta Scott King Award. And Jerry Kraft, the author, really has become a friend of our family. And he had a book club at his school, and they were reading New Kid. And Jerry texted me and was like, hey, can I pop in? And so my son's really shy, and Jerry is thankful to my son. He was his first review. And if you can read kind of some of my son's review, this book is about this young Black man. It's mostly based on Jerry's life, who went to a suburban majority white school, and he was from the inner city in New York. And so he had a code switch. And throughout the book, he's in the Batman and he's in the Star Wars. And my son connected on a nerd level, not on a black and white issue. And we were able to have really fantastic conversations about white privilege, about what it means to code switch, about all these things. And so in the book meeting, Jerry Kraft Skyped in with us and he pointed Liam out and he made him come up to the front of the class. And I mean, it was just an amazing experience. And I got to tell you, if you're an educator, authors love librarians and teachers and they want to interact with us. My youngest likes reading manga and she read Sense and Sensibility. I mean, we had to have some conversations, but she read it and now she wants to read the real version, if you will. And so she was able to get most of it because of the images and the built-in scaffolding that's there. My oldest does the same. So we share all these and we interact with a lot of different authors. And comics have changed. It's the number one thing I say is if you haven't been to a comic book store lately, for one thing, girls work there now, and it's not all white guys anymore. The representation has changed in a very, very powerful way. And the comic books are so intelligent. And a lot of it aren't, there's not even the capes and cows. It's not just superhero comics, but even the superhero comics have changed. And this is one, for instance, where the Agents of Girl, where at the end they interview real life scientists, female scientists. And my daughters read this book and my oldest said, I want to be a scientist, Dad. And she stuck with that. And now she wants to be perhaps an anthropologist, archaeologist, something along those lines because of what she read in a comic book. So I talk about the representation. The old sexualization of women in comics is still there. The He-Man type of men is still there, but we're also starting to see changes in body type too. We have a Latino and a Black Green Lantern. We have a 16-year-old Pakistani American girl from Jersey City, my favorite, Miss Marvel. We have America Vasquez. We have Thor. Jane Foster is Thor. She's one of my favorite heroes. She's struggling with breast cancer. And every time she becomes Thor, it accelerates the cancer because it kicks the chemo out of her body. And yet she continues to fight. And now they're going to make a movie about her. And my youngest was Thor for Halloween. And she runs around Comic Cons with her big hammer and her helmet. And people will say like, oh, you're Lady Thor, you're female Thor. And she's, no, it's Thor. Like, it's not the girl Thor, it's Thor. And she'll correct you. Riri Williams, 15-year-old, she's the new Iron Man, if you will. And I included this picture here because here they hypersexualize a young African-American girl again. And there was a lot of backlash, and Marvel no longer draws her like this. So there is a way to have an impact on these companies and make meaningful change too. We have all different kinds of characters. Hulk is Korean, Wolverine is a girl. Of course, now we know Sam Wilson as Captain America. Like, you can find representation of anybody, Native Americans, Muslim, Indian, it's fantastic. And I'm glad that my kids are growing up with this, because for me, when I grew up, what was the diversity? Like Lando Calrissian and Princess Leia, like that was it. So it's fantastic. Here's G. Willow Wilson, who was co-creator of Miss Marvel. And the character is Muslim, but it's not a Muslim story. But you can actually learn a lot about different religions and different ethnicities through comic books. And this idea that she's from the weird family and with the weird holidays, and turns out she's like everybody else. You know, Christmas, some people don't know about Christmas or Easter, and so it's a way that we can break down those barriers. Captain America, I have my students do lessons like these, like what would Captain Mexico look like? What would Captain America look like in 2200? What would he look like in 1500? Well, these kinds of things. And if you know your flags, Captain America is actually Captain Puerto Rico. That's, you know, the Puerto Rican flag. So, you know, these great conversations that we can have. Reading Olympics, which is in Pennsylvania, every state has a different version. A lot of the lists now have graphic novels on them. My wife is a coach. My daughter's on the team. And she had come home from the contest all excited because she did a lot better than the other students because they weren't taught how to read graphic novels and they only looked at the dialogue. And you have to understand that the images are there for a reason. They add so much more to the story, and you have to put it together with the images. And I say that, number one, up front, we have to teach our students how to read graphic novels. Our most advanced readers can struggle and get lost, just like we have to teach them how to read a comic book, a textbook or anything else. Project Lit, which I am a proud advisor for at Wissahickon High School. Project Lit is a nationwide organization that reads books with purposeful representation. New Kid was on there. The March graphic novels, which are my favorite, based on Congressman John Lewis's life during the civil rights movement. Alfonso Jones, who was racially profiled and shot and killed by police officers. Hey Kiddo, which is written biography about Jared Krasaska, who just awful childhood. Mom was addicted to drugs. Dad's not in the picture. Mom went to jail and then rehab. He grew up with his grandparents, and yet it's filled with such hope. And I have students who live this life, and that's the thing here. They see themselves in these books. Speak, the graphic novel, Laurie Hulse Anderson, who's a friend of mine, probably one of the most famous teen novels, based loosely upon her experiences of being raped in 9th grade, was adapted to a graphic novel. And my wife and I wrote the teacher guides for the book. I presented with Laurie. And again, we have students who are living this. And the thing with a graphic novel like this is it's not just for girls to read. It's very much for boys to read. And we need to have those conversations. And so these are some of the images in the graphic novel. And for me, I identified with this. I had issues as a child. I'll be honest, I was sexually abused as a child. And so as a male, I was able to identify and literally see myself in this comic book. And when I talked to Lori about it, she said, well, we're family now. Like that's how she talks to everybody. She takes in all this and she speaks up not just for women, but for anybody who suffered any kind of abuse through this graphic novel and other things that she does. We have refurbished old newspaper bins at Wissahickon, and we're putting them out in the community. This idea that we are putting comic books and graphic novels and books full of representation out in our community. COVID kind of put a halt on it for now, but the idea is that we want our students to own books because we know Wissahickon, we have a lot of wealth, and we also have extreme poverty at Wissahickon. And when students come out, when young kids come out in these summer programs that I work with, and they walk away with a book that they own with characters that look like them, I mean, it's the most amazing thing, the smile on their faces. And so I do say that as teachers, take a look, they call it decolonizing your library. Take a look at the books that you have. Not just the characters, but also the authors and the artists. Are they representative of our diversity in our country? I do a lot of work with young kids, which is fantastic. Unlike high school kids, young kids love teachers, the big hugs and all that kind of stuff. And I tease, but these are the things that bring the kids in. I've helped schools organize Comic-Cons. My own kids' school, we just did a Comic-Con. My high school is going to do a Comic-Con. And it's a day for literacy. It is about dressing up, and but it literally is a day about literacy. And I present at Comic-Cons around the country, and we talk about literacy in our panels. It's fantastic. That's my daughter. Anna Green Gables is her favorite recently, and she read the graphic novel version, and so she dressed up like her. I'm also, I don't have a lot of free time. This is also, I'm also advisor for our pop culture club. And it really is the club that I needed in high school. Like when I was in high school, I talked about hip hop all day long. I went to Philadelphia Public Schools, but I never talked about comics. I was afraid I would have gotten my ass beat in high school, where nerd now has a whole different term. My own kids are proud to be nerds. And it really is a club for just the people who, in some cases like me, wouldn't have fit in another club. And these are just some of the kids. And we literally just sit around and we talk about Star Wars and Disney movies and comic books and how they are windows and mirrors of our world. It's fascinating, and I learned so much from them. The beginning of the year started out really, really well. The Pennsylvania Secretary of Education came out to visit me, came out to my classroom, completely embarrassed me in front of the entire staff. I didn't know he was coming. Turns out he's a big old nerd, and he loves comic books. And so he gave me a present and came to my classroom, and I mean, it was just fantastic. And so now I work with the Pennsylvania Department of Education as well. I've taken my students to Comic-Cons, and we've presented as equals, as colleagues, about what we do. And it's funny because most of the kids that work with me are female, and such a different experience than what I grew up with. And so it just kind of shows you that representation. Just yesterday, I'm still on a high, coming off of a 10-week program with the United States State Department. We worked with all these countries around the world with educators about comic books and education. And we're working with their students to allow them to tell their stories through comic books. And we're sharing them with each other. And we're doing virtual exchanges with my classroom and their classrooms. I mean, I was crying through the graduation yesterday, the lifelong friendships that we've created. And so they created superheroes, and they solved some of their nation's problems through their superheroes in realistic ways. And these are the things that we can do through comic books. I've also worked for through different embassies in different countries and things. And really, we find that comics are universal, particularly American superheroes are universal. We only have a few more minutes. So I'll just do like maybe 3 more slides, and then I wanted to answer some questions. I'm sorry, I'm used to talking for like 3 hours. But comic books have been with us for thousands of years. Comic books are just an images put together to tell a story. So the Bayeux Tapestry, this is a 230-foot long comic book. And so this is real history, right? This is real, it's a comic book, no different. The Mexican Codex from 1049, discovered by the Europeans, same idea, it's a comic book. The Manna Tomb, also a comic book, it's sequential art. And what's great about this one is it took Western anthropologists a long time to figure this out, because it actually starts down the bottom right, and then the story goes to the left. But it just, again, it shows you that in Asian cultures, African cultures, Native American cultures, sequential art and comics have been with us for so long. So again, and then, we talk about pop culture. We talk about what is social studies. And my students in the beginning of the year, I ask them, or images like this, is this social studies? And they're like, oh, no, like my honors kids. No, that's not. I'm like, really? Because Godzilla was created by Japan after, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Straight out of Compton. Well, this is based on what these kids went through in Compton. Star Wars, a lot of it was based on Joan of Arc and World War II, and Hitler, and Avatar is a stand-in for Western imperialism. And so what happens in the world, like we know that Mary Shelley's Frankenstein was impacted by the Industrial Revolution. Frankenstein is literally pop culture, although we see that as real literature. We need to see comic books as the same way. So yeah, I've got like 8,000 more slides, but like I said, I wanted to have a chance if anybody wanted to ask questions, or I'll just keep talking. But does anybody, I don't know if you want to turn your camera on or unmute yourself, ask a question, I'll answer to the best of my ability. If not, I'm going to keep talking.
Circumstances, excuse me, of you meeting Daryl from Run DMC. I love him. I've read his book. It's so good.
Oh, his book about when he went through suicide watch.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I have it in my classroom. And Daryl, he writes his own comic books now. Daryl makes comics. Yeah, Daryl makes comics. Oh. And the hero is a teacher. And Daryl was a straight A student, went to a Catholic school, and he said his hip hop persona was like his Iron Man suit. That wasn't really him on the stage. And it's why he actually started drinking so much, because it wasn't his authentic self. So here you've got like my Adidas, and it's why I wore Adidas in high school. Like DMC was my jam. And here he always wears like classic rock t-shirts now. And he goes and talks to schools and kids about be who you are. I love Lori's shirt. I write, therefore I rewrite.
Yeah. And Marybeth Aveeno has a question, Tim. Sure. Mary's on the call here. Mary, if you would just unmute your microphone.
Thank you. I was just having some Zoom problems. I went from computer, and Tim, I'm telling you, thank you so much. I was so excited to hear about this presentation. In fact, you and I discussed it when I first came on board, and I was just so intrigued, and I'm just blown away. Thank you. My question is, I have two granddaughters, and I took them, I'll make it quick, I know you don't have time. Took my one granddaughter to Barnes & Noble. She's not a reader, and I try to encourage her all the time. Well, she gravitated to Jerry Craft's book, and I looked at it, I'm like, oh my God, she wants a comic book. And I was like, you know, biting my nails. I'm like, oh my God, it's not a real book. All right, but I'm going to go with this, you know, anything. She read that whole book. And I thought, I almost had chills. And then when you start doing this, I'm like, so how can they live very far, so it's not like I can take her easily. How can I get her on board remotely and introduce her more to all these books? Is there some way I can subscribe and send them to her? Or what are your thoughts? How can I get started?
So it's funny, my daughter's going to high school. She actually subscribes to Archie comics. They come every 3 weeks of all things. She loves Archie comics. But my son and I read a lot of comics on the iPad. There's an app called Comixology, Comixology, Comixology. There are some graphic novels for free on there. There's other ones that, you pay for, but a lot of them are sorted by age level. And so we had to go, 2 months without going to the comic book store. We go every single Wednesday when new comic books come out. And so that was like a hardship, right? Like first world problems, I know. But the app was how we were able to keep up. So Comixology is probably the easiest way to do it. Also, if you're an Amazon Prime member, they also have free comic books through Amazon Prime too. Not a lot, but there are some.
Oh, great. Thank you so much for those tips. I'm definitely going to do that. Thank you.
Thanks for being open-minded, Mary.
Thanks, Tim.
I have a few questions. First of all, going back to the last question, if you're in Pennsylvania, you can be a member of the Philadelphia Free Library, and they have some online apps, Hoopla, which allows you to get comics for free through that. Question-wise, I'm a biology teacher at Kappa, and I was wondering, do you have two questions. First, do you have a starter list or a list of comics and graphic novels that you would suggest? And B, do you have any that are specifically science-based?
There are. And there's even math ones. Usually the math teachers in my presentations are like, oh, but there's nothing for math. I'm like, actually, I know a math teacher friend of mine, 8th grade math teacher, created a graphic novel. So there are. On my website, teachingwithcomics.com, if you click on the upper right-hand corner on the waffle, it'll pull down with all the different subjects. And I put a lot of different comic books, so I don't give you a whole list off the top of my head. But there's lots of fantastic biology, physics, astronomy. There's all kinds of different comics that you can get started with if you take a look there.
One other thought that I had, with a lot of kids these days watching anime, if you can get them to watch the subtitled rather than the dubbed, that might also be very good for helping their reading skills.
Yes, reading is reading is reading. Absolutely.
Thank you. This has been a really interesting presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Tim, I have a question for you. I'm Bill Galvin. I'm also at Gwynedd Mercy University. And first of all, thank you very, very much. That was really interesting. I absolutely enjoyed listening to you. You've got a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of energy, and much to share. So we're proud to have you as an alum.
Thank you.
The question, I guess, a comment that I had, some time back, I remember reading an article that talked about what they called a 30 million word gap. And basically, if you're familiar with the article, it indicated that by the age of 3, it's incredibly compelling if there's truth to it, and I think there is some. But by the age of 3, there's some 30 million word gap between different socioeconomic groupings. And it's, to me at least, it's one of those few cherished articles that I share with my kids. I have 3 boys all the time, and I keep telling them, read to your kids, read to your kids, read to your kids. And you're probably one of the best people to exemplify that by what you just got finished sharing with us. But I don't know if you're familiar with that or if you could speak to that issue, because it just seems such a profound article and such a profound piece of information.
I am. And we also know that if students aren't caught up on reading level by 3rd grade, they never catch up.
Mm-hmm.
And so I get them in high school and we do what we can do. And high schools don't have reading specialists anymore. A lot of them don't have librarians anymore. And then it's too late. So this is why I do a lot of work with, we have a pre-K reading initiative at Wissahickon. And the idea is to get books into these houses, into these homes, physical books, not online, not physical books, because a lot of parents don't have the means to have them. We have kids coming in kindergarten who don't know how to use a book. I mean, literally don't know how to hold it. It breaks your heart. And you have other kids who are on a second, third grade reading level because they've been taught reading at home for so long. And so we talk a lot about the achievement gap. You know, we were talking about predominantly African American, kids of minority, but also particularly low economic status of all colors, ethnicities. And we really need to put our efforts there, because when we put it in, you know, like I teach juniors, there's only so much I can do to make that movement. And those kids are so angry and so frustrated at that point. So absolutely, that article is very much spot on.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you. Wonderful questions. And Tim, thank you so much for your presentation. It was, as always, fantastic. I've seen you speak several times now, and I can never get enough. You always have new and interesting content. Your photos are amazing. You have a wealth of knowledge, and we appreciate you sharing that with us. And I just wanted to tell the group that what I neglected to say was that Tim is also an Alumni Association board member. He has things going on, and so he served with us for a year and is stepping down for hopefully a little while. But no pressure, Tim. But I just wanted to thank you again for being with us, Tim, and for your time and sharing these wonderful resources. And hopefully, you know, if we each are able to share what we've heard today with one person, perhaps we can all, you know, make a better impact. And I did want to let everyone know that we do have another Griffins at Home event tomorrow night. So if you have any children or grandchildren, one of our professors in education, Mary Jo Pierantozzi, who is also an alumna, is going to be reading Should I Share My Ice Cream by Mo Willems. And it should be a wonderful, a good treat for everyone. So if you know Mary Jo and you just want to tune in, even if you don't have kids or grandkids, please feel free and share the word. This series is not necessarily for just alumni. It's for the entire Gwinnett community and our extended friends and community as well. So thank you everyone for being here today. Thank you, Tim, and hopefully, you know, we'll see some people back tomorrow evening at 7 p.m. on July 2nd for Mary Jo Pierantozzi. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, Jan.
Yeah.